Welcome back, chums. One of the things I like to share with us here in our community are sort of history things that you find out about your own family, and then the sort of thing stops and you think, well, did anybody else know anything about this? And this is this particular video that I wanted to share with you today. Many of you may know, if you've been with me a long time, that my late grandfather, who sadly I didn't really know that well. It's funny, isn't it, memories that you have of people that you met very briefly at the start of your life. I remember him always wearing a bow tie, a white shirt, impeccably dressed, and a brilliant pianist. I know this because he never stopped playing the piano. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. Sadly, I think if he'd have lived a lot longer, he may have made me a better pianist. It's the sort of thing, isn't it? But sadly, it wasn't to be. Same really with both grandparents. They were all in show business, but they all left way too early. The reason I wanted to share this story, though, is it's one that my father told me all about, obviously, his father. And at the time, my grandfather had already played at Windsor Castle as part of an ENSA sort of group. During the war, when they were off duty, they would be sent down to sort of entertain other people. And consequently, you can understand, my grandfather being a good pianist, he was in very much demand. And so consequently, being a little bit older too, he got invited to things like Windsor Castle. And I said to my dad, that must have been an absolute thrill. And he said, well, not with your grandfather, He said he just saw everything as a sort of job. He enjoyed it. He couldn't believe it. He was absolutely enamored to meet the king and the princesses. But, he said in those days, there were no sort of pictures and everything was under control. You weren't really allowed to say where you were going, what you were doing, who you were doing it for. And I said, isn't that such a shame? When you look back now, you think, wow. And I often wonder what happened to all those letters and invites and things like that. One story, though, that he wanted to share, which I thought I wanted to throw this out to the chums. Well, let me explain. Welcome back. Thank you so much as ever for your time, and welcome one and all brand new subscribers. This story, as I say, I don't mean dismissively of my grandfather, but he was so much a royalist. He didn't really even want to share that particular story because many years later he thought, this might get out and we weren't supposed to say anything. People had a lot more respect in those days, didn't they? This story really centres on this particular topic, though, because just prior to this sort of conclusion of the war, basically the government had put out this sort of remit where they were looking for a sort of brand new, I suppose you might call it, signature tune, anthem, because obviously things like White Cliffs of Dover, We'll Meet Again by the brilliant Dame Vera Lynn, and of course wonderful songs by Anne Shelton had all done a sterling job during the war. But apparently the government, and alongside Sir Winston Churchill, wanted something more rousing for the conclusion. What better to throw it open to people like in ENSA, people who were musically minded, etc. And this was the idea. Now, what was interesting was that, this was put through various sort of, I believe, newspapers. As yet, I can't find that either. Perhaps maybe through the Stage or the Performer, which were leading sort of theatrical publications of the day. Now, what was interesting is my grandfather wrote a tune called Just a Memory, and I do have the sheet music, and I do have him playing the tune. Sadly, it's on one of those old reel-to-reels, so it's not easy to find to be able to play it. And it's kind of spooky listening to him talking. I have heard it, because clearly you do see a lot of similarities. What was interesting about this, so he transposed the music himself onto sheet music, and as I say, it might sound big-headed, he was a brilliant pianist, he really was. He could read music in one key and play it in another. He could put flourishes on that were not there, and he often played for my mum when she was doing certain concert dates, and she said, he can make you sound like an orchestra. He was very sort of, he never boasted about his skills, it was just, I can do this, right? Now, what happened was he sent it off, he heard nothing, and so he decided to take matters into his own hands. And so he took my father, who was very young, down to London. He was also working part-time on the railways, so he had a pass. Didn't cost him anything. True Yorkshireman, you get the picture. And what was interesting about this particular story was he decided to deliver the sheet music directly himself to Downing Street. Oh yeah, I mean, in those days you could walk up. There was just one policeman outside the door, and I do have a picture of my father with the policeman from that visit. Likewise, he decided to drop it off to the Houses of Parliament. Then apparently he made a discovery that in fact this might have been something a little bit more, shall we say, not what it appeared. You see, he had a friend in Denmark Street, which was affectionately known as our Tin Pan Alley. And while this was put out as a sort of national competition, it would appear that actually what they were looking for were leading lights of the day, big songwriters, known names like Coward, Ivor Novello, to come up with a rousing tune. But of course, this got everybody going into that, didn't it? And I said, well, what happened then? He said, well, he didn't give up. He turned up in Harrods and decided to give the patrons of Harrods, without being asked, a sterling performance of his own tune, apparently to the point where people were standing around clapping. He went into a bit of an encore until a man in a long tailcoat came over and basically said, if you don't mind, sir, are you interested in buying this piano? And apparently my grandfather lowered the lid and said, don't worry, lad, I've a better one than this at home. He didn't have, but that was him, apparently. The reason why I ask this question is, does anybody else, if you were living over here in the United Kingdom at the time, know anything about this? Because, you know, seemingly, I've done a bit of research, I can't find anything, and it does seem odd, doesn't it? But it wouldn't seem too different when you think about it, I suppose, to something like Britain's Got Talent, Opportunity Knocks, let people think they're doing a sterling job, you know, the sort of thing. Either way, his music lives on. Sadly, it was never recorded other than on that reel-to-reel. But it's interesting to think that, you know, you look at your legacy, he turned up in Downing Street, he played it in Harrods, and he went to the Houses of Parliament. Sometimes you wonder genetically where you get your drive from. You get the picture? Do let me know if you know anything, as ever. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.